I almost died, and that's what led me to the truth. Not some accident on the road or anything. Nope. A near-death experience of a different kind. The kind where your whole life flips upside down because of two people you thought you could trust with everything. The last few weeks had been a nightmare. I'd been feeling off, sick, run down, losing weight. I thought it was just stress. Sarah, my wife, wasn't exactly helping. She'd been cold and distant, short with me over the smallest things, and honestly, I figured maybe we were just going through a rough patch. She kept saying she was busy with work, or tired, or some excuse to not spend time together. So here I am, feeling like I've got one foot in the grave, while my wife can barely look me in the eye. I ended up in the hospital after a scare, and when she barely showed up to visit, my mind started running in circles. I kept wondering why she'd pull back just when I needed her most. But the truth didn't even cross my mind until I got home. That was when I found the messages, the ones that blew my whole world apart. Turns out, she wasn't just distant. She was spending her nights with someone else. And the part that still makes me sick? That someone else was my own brother. So, I'm lying in bed, still drained from the hospital, and Sarah's finally home from work. I should have been happy to see her, but there was something in her face that didn't look right. She barely looked at me, just sort of muttered a "hey" before heading straight to the shower, leaving her phone sitting on the nightstand. Now, I'm not the type to snoop around. In 7 years, I'd never once touched her phone without asking. But that night I couldn't shake this feeling, like my gut was screaming at me. So I grabbed her phone. It was stupid, maybe, but I felt like I had to know why she'd been so distant. I expected to feel guilty, but that vanished the second I opened her texts and saw she had a whole hidden message thread. And there it was, my brother's name. My own damn brother. I thought my brain was messing with me, but I tapped on his name, and there it was, message after message, some dating back months. I saw texts talking about their next meetup, about how she'd missed him, and then the worst of it, last night was the best sex of my life. That line hit me like a punch to the gut. I sat there, just frozen, reading through every word like it was some horrible dream. The woman I'd built a life with, who I thought was my partner, was cheating on me, with the guy I'd grown up with. I felt my heart pounding like it was going to explode. I wanted to throw her phone against the wall, but something kept me scrolling, like I had to know how far this really went. And I'll never forget it. Just as I hit the last message, I heard the water shut off in the bathroom. I barely had time to process what I just read before she walked back in, drying her hair like nothing was wrong. As soon as Sarah stepped into the room, it was like the air thickened. My heart was pounding so loud I thought she'd hear it. She looked up at me, barely glancing before shifting her eyes away, acting casual. But I couldn't let it go. I just couldn't. Sarah, I started, my voice cracking more than I wanted. Who were you texting earlier? She froze, her hands still wrapped in the towel as she looked at me. What are you talking about? She forced a little laugh, like I was just being paranoid or overthinking things. But I could see the flicker of panic in her eyes. Don't lie to me, Sarah, I said, feeling my anger build, all the months of suspicion flooding over me. I saw the messages. I couldn't even finish the sentence without my throat tightening. With my brother, Sarah. I saw what you've been doing with him. Her face went white, and for a split second, I saw real fear in her eyes. But then, like a switch flipping, her expression turned cold, almost defiant. What the hell were you doing snooping through my phone? She shot back, her voice raising as if I was the one in the wrong. I couldn't believe it. She wasn't even denying it. No, she was blaming me, like I was some creep who had no right to look. I almost died this week, Sarah, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. And this is what's been going on behind my back? She crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing. Don't act so innocent, Jack. You haven't exactly been perfect. She said it so casually, like she'd been waiting for this moment to turn everything back on me. But it didn't matter what she said. I knew exactly what I'd seen, and there was no way she was going to manipulate her way out of it. She kept standing there, her arms crossed, daring me to keep questioning her, like I was the one who had something to answer for. It was like I didn't even recognize the woman I married. All those years, all that trust, gone in a matter of minutes. I stood there, staring at her, trying to process everything. I wanted answers, something to explain why she'd torn our lives apart. But all she gave me was a stony face, like she was daring me to keep pushing. I felt a twisted mix of anger and heartbreak, the kind that made my chest feel tight, like I was suffocating. "So, how long has this been going on?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. She rolled her eyes. "Oh, Jack, stop being dramatic," she scoffed, shaking her head. "We were just talking. You're acting like I'm some kind of villain." "Just talking?" I shot back, feeling the heat rise in my face. "Don't insult me, Sarah. I saw those messages." I took a shaky breath, bracing myself for what she might say next. "How long?" She looked away, biting her lip. For a moment, I thought maybe she felt guilty. Maybe she'd finally be honest. But then, she just shrugged, mumbling, "A few months, maybe." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Months? They'd been sneaking around behind my back for months, while I thought we were just going through a rough patch. While I'd been sitting here, sick and thinking something was wrong with me, she was off with my own brother. Why him? The question just slipped out, almost desperate. I couldn't wrap my head around it. Why him of all people? She glanced at me, barely hiding the hint of a smirk. "Honestly? Because he actually listens to me. Because he's not, well, he's not you, Jack." She spat out that last part, and the words cut deep, like salt on a wound. I felt my fists clench, and I had to force myself to breathe, to keep my voice steady. "I gave you everything, Sarah. Everything. And this is how you repay me?" She rolled her eyes again. "Don't act so innocent, Jack. You're not perfect." It was the same deflection, as if pointing out my supposed flaws was some kind of excuse. I'd never felt so completely shattered and angry all at once. All those years, every memory, every promise. It was like she'd just tossed them in the trash without a second thought. And here I was, left to pick up the pieces of a life I thought I knew. After her cold response, I knew I wasn't going to get the truth straight from her. She told me just enough to satisfy herself, but I felt like there was more, things she still wasn't admitting. So, while she stormed off to the guest room, muttering about how she needed space to think, I sat down and started piecing things together myself. The next day, I took a day off work and started digging through old phone bills, bank statements, anything I could find that might show me how long this had really been going on. And sure enough, there it was, a pattern that felt like a gut punch. Late-night calls to his number, sometimes even right after we'd been together. Trips to the mall or dinners charged on her card at places I'd never even heard of, let alone visited with her. It was like our whole life was a lie, a front she'd been putting up while she ran off to meet him in secret. I remembered her telling me she was going on a work trip last month. She'd been so insistent about needing time to focus and recharge. She even made me feel guilty for suggesting we could use a little vacation ourselves. But when I checked the dates, they lined up with a weekend that my brother had supposedly been helping a friend move out of town. The pieces fit too perfectly. It wasn't a coincidence. They'd been together, somewhere far away, while I'd been at home believing every lie she told me. My head was spinning. I kept seeing images of them sneaking around, laughing at me behind my back, treating me like a fool. I tried to call my brother that afternoon, hoping he'd at least own up to it, but he didn't answer. I texted him, "We need to talk now," but he left me on read. By the time Sarah came back that evening, my anger had turned into something colder, sharper. I tried to confront her the night before, but now I wanted the full truth. No more lies, no more cover-ups. I deserved to hear it all, even if it broke me. She walked in, giving me that same dismissive look she'd had before, like she'd already made up her mind that she didn't owe me anything. But I wasn't going to let her off that easy this time. When Sarah walked in, I didn't waste any time. I sat there, looking her dead in the eye, all my anger boiling under the surface. She stopped, probably realizing I wasn't just going to let it go. For the first time, she looked a little nervous. "We need to talk, Sarah. Now." My voice was low, but she knew I meant it. She rolled her eyes, crossing her arms like this was some inconvenience. "Jack, can we not do this right now? I've had a long day." I shook my head, barely able to contain myself. No, we're doing this right now. I took a deep breath, trying to keep from shouting. I went through the phone bills, Sarah, the bank statements. I know this didn't just start. I know it's been going on for months. That took the wind out of her. She stared at me, her face pale, but only for a second. Then she regained her composure, raising her chin defiantly. So what? What do you want me to say, Jack? You were never around. You were always so wrapped up in your own world. I could feel my hands shaking, my jaw clenched so tight it hurt. I was never around? Sarah, I was the one holding things together, keeping this house running, doing everything I could to make you happy. Oh, please, she scoffed, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Like I was supposed to be satisfied with a husband who thinks a night out is ordering pizza on the couch. So that's what this is about. You wrecked our marriage because you wanted some dinners and late nights out? My voice cracked, the hurt bleeding through despite my anger. You went behind my back with my brother, Sarah. She looked down, her eyes avoiding mine, and muttered, maybe I was looking for something real. I just stared at her, the words hitting me harder than I could have imagined. Real? I repeated, stunned. After everything we've been through, you think he's more real than the life we built together? She didn't say anything, just kept her gaze down, like she couldn't even face me. I wanted her to feel a shred of remorse, to understand the damage she'd done. But it was like she was a stranger, cold, detached, and completely unfazed. In that moment, I realized I wasn't talking to the woman I thought I'd married. This was someone else entirely, and it felt like she'd been that way for a long time without me even knowing. I stood there, just staring at her, trying to process it all. It was like I'd been hit with a brick wall of reality. Sarah wasn't just cheating on me. She was rewriting our entire history, downplaying every moment we'd shared like it meant nothing. Like I meant nothing. After a long silence, I managed to find my voice. You could have left, Sarah. If I wasn't real enough, if you weren't happy, you could have just walked out instead of tearing me apart like this. She shrugged, an indifference in her eyes that I'd never seen before. And what would I have left for, Jack? You know how hard it is to start over? To be alone? I was fine with both of you. She gave me a look, almost like she expected me to just accept that she'd had this double life, like it was my fault for not seeing it. Something inside me snapped. Both of us? Both of us? Sarah, do you hear yourself right now? I trusted you. I loved you. And you thought you'd just keep us both in the dark? She sighed, annoyed. Look, Jack, I never meant for you to find out. It just happened, all right? Maybe if you'd been more attentive, I wouldn't have had to go somewhere else. There it was again, her spinning it back on me, trying to make me feel like I was the one who'd let things slip. But I wasn't falling for it. I was done feeling like the bad guy here. So, this is my fault now? I asked, a hollow laugh escaping my lips. After everything, you're still making this my fault? She didn't answer, just looked at me with this exhausted expression, as if this was all beneath her. I couldn't take it. I grabbed my keys and headed for the door, feeling like if I stayed one more second, I'd say something I couldn't take back. As I stepped out into the cold night air, the reality of it all hit me like a wave. I was married to a stranger who had wrecked everything we'd built, and somehow, she felt nothing. I didn't know what I was supposed to do, but I knew one thing. I couldn't go back in there. I drove aimlessly for a while, mind racing, hands gripping the wheel so tight they were turning white. The hurt, the betrayal, it all felt too much to bear. I couldn't go back home, not after what she'd said, but I didn't know where else to go. So, I ended up at a cheap motel on the edge of town. The room was cold and smelled like stale cigarettes, but it was somewhere to think, somewhere to just breathe. As I sat on the bed, it all started sinking in. Sarah didn't just betray me. She'd planned this, calculated it, and turned it into some twisted game. And she'd somehow convinced herself it was my fault. But what got to me the most was the part my brother played in all of it. My brother. I kept replaying every family dinner, every time he'd looked me in the eye and acted like nothing was going on. How many times had he been sitting across from me, lying to my face? How many memories were tainted now, knowing he'd been part of this? I knew I needed answers, Real answers, not the half-truths and deflections Sarah had thrown at me. So, as I lay there in that dingy motel room, I decided I'd confront him. I didn't know what I was expecting. Maybe he'd deny it. Maybe he'd have his own excuses, but I needed to hear it straight from him. I picked up my phone and sent him a message. We're talking tomorrow. No more avoiding this. This time, I wasn't taking silence for an answer. If he didn't respond, I'd show up at his place. I was done being left in the dark, done being the last one to know about my own life. Tomorrow, I'd finally get the truth, no matter how ugly it turned out to be. The next morning, I didn't waste any time. I didn't care about the awkwardness, the anger, or even the hurt. I was getting answers, and I was getting them now. I grabbed my phone and called my brother, straight to voicemail. Of course, I wasn't surprised. He'd always been good at avoiding confrontation, especially when things got tough. But this wasn't just some petty argument. This was about everything I thought I knew, everything I'd built, being torn apart. So I drove straight to his apartment. I didn't even knock, just barged in through the front door like I owned the place. He was sitting on the couch, playing a video game, like nothing had happened, like the world hadn't just crumbled around both of us. He didn't even look up when I walked in, just kept playing. "What's up, Jack? You need something?" I stood there for a second, watching him, feeling a rush of rage flood through me. How could he act so normal after everything? "Yeah, I need something, all right," I said, my voice low but steady. "I need you to explain why you've been sleeping with my wife behind my back, why you thought it was okay to stab me in the damn heart." That caught his attention. He finally paused the game and turned to face me, his face pale and his eyes wide. For a moment, he just stared, probably hoping I was joking or imagining things. But when I didn't flinch, when I just stood there, waiting for him to speak, his mask finally cracked. "Jack, he started, but his voice faltered. He stood up, looking uncomfortable. "It's not like you think." Not like I think?" I cut him off. "There's no not like I think, Aaron. I saw the texts. I saw what's been going on." He ran a hand through his hair, looking for some excuse, some explanation, but there was nothing left. His face flushed red, and he looked away, almost ashamed. "I didn't mean for it to happen, all right? I didn't plan this. It just happened." "Happened?" My voice cracked this time, the betrayal too much to hold back. "You're telling me you didn't plan this? You didn't plan to sleep with my wife, lie to me, and ruin everything we had? You just let it happen?" Aaron opened his mouth, but no words came out. He didn't have an answer. There was no explanation that could make sense of what he'd done. And that's when I realized something. I could keep digging, keep pushing for an explanation, but I wasn't going to get anything more than excuses. I'd never get back what was lost, and no amount of talking was going to fix the fact that my own brother had destroyed my trust. That part of my life was over. I stood there for a moment, watching Aaron squirm, unable to come up with a single damn thing that would make this right. I could feel the anger boiling up inside me, but at the same time, there was this crushing weight in my chest, a mix of betrayal, disappointment, and sheer disbelief. This was my brother, the guy I grew up with, the guy I trusted. And now, here he was, just as much of a liar and a cheater as Sarah. "So what now?" I asked, my voice flat, almost too calm. "You're just gonna stand there, trying to act like it was some accident? You think this is something I'm just gonna forget?" Aaron looked down, his hands trembling. "I never meant to hurt you, Jack. I swear. I was just, I don't know. Everything's been messed up lately, and I wasn't thinking clearly. It was stupid." "Stupid?" I repeated, taking a step forward. "This isn't stupid, Aaron. This is ruining my life. Do you get that? You think I can just pretend like nothing happened? Like I can just go back to being the guy who never saw this coming?" He took a deep breath and tried to meet my eyes, but the guilt was written all over his face. "I'm sorry, man. I really am. I didn't want things to go this far." I laughed bitterly. "Yeah, well, that's great. Your apology doesn't change anything. It doesn't make it go away. You've destroyed something that I can never get back." The silence that followed felt like an eternity, and in that moment, I realized something. I wasn't angry anymore, not at him, not at Sarah. What I felt was something deeper, something that was harder to deal with. It was grief. Grief for the life I thought I had. Grief for the trust that was shattered beyond repair. And most of all, grief for the brother I thought I knew, the one who would never do something like this to me. Finally, I turned and headed for the door. I didn't say another word to Aaron. What more could I say? The damage was done, and no amount of apologies was going to fix it. I left his apartment, the weight of the situation crashing down on me as I stepped back into the cold. For the first time, I didn't know what I was supposed to do next. I could walk away from Sarah, but where did that leave me? Could I ever trust anyone again? Could I ever forgive them? Or would I be stuck in this bitter, empty place forever? I didn't have a plan. Hell, I barely had the energy to even think straight. But as I sat in my car, staring at the empty street outside Aaron's place, I realized something. I could keep dwelling on the lies. I could keep replaying every moment, every second, wondering where I went wrong. Or I could make a decision. I hadn't had one in days. I'd been letting Sarah's lies and Aaron's betrayal dictate my every move, like I was stuck on some track with no way off. But now I was done with that. The truth was, I was broken. I didn't know who I was anymore, or who I had been in all these years with Sarah. Everything felt like a house of cards, and once I learned about the affair, it all came crashing down in an instant. I didn't want to go back to that house. I didn't want to go back to Sarah, especially after what had happened with Aaron. It wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was about the lies, the way they both treated me like I was just some fool to be played with. But walking away wasn't as simple as slamming a door and leaving. I had a life with her. We had built something together. Hell, we even talked about kids and a future. I couldn't just throw that away. Or could I? I pulled my phone out, staring at Sarah's number. I could feel the anger bubbling up again. How could she have done this to me? After everything, after all we'd been through, she just checked out? I thought about all the times I'd forgiven her before, all the little cracks I'd ignored, hoping they would just fix themselves. But this wasn't a crack. It was a whole damn fracture. And I realized I couldn't fix it. I couldn't keep trying to piece back something that was already shattered beyond repair. I made the call. It rang a few times before she picked up, her voice sounding like nothing had happened. Jack? What's going on? I took a deep breath. We need to talk. In person. Now. She hesitated for a moment, but then she agreed. Okay, I'll meet you in an hour. The moment I hung up, I knew what I had to do. I didn't have to fight for this anymore. I didn't have to beg her to care, to feel the same way about me. I had to walk away, and that was the hardest part. When I showed up at the park where we agreed to meet, I could already see her in the distance, sitting on a bench, looking like she had all the time in the world. She wasn't nervous, wasn't showing any signs of the tension that was choking me from the inside. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I walked toward her. My hands were sweating, my mind racing, but I had to stay calm. I couldn't let her control the narrative anymore. She smiled when she saw me, and for a split second, it almost made me second-guess everything. She was still my Sarah. But then I remembered everything. The lies, the texts, Aaron, the betrayal that had been festering behind my back. I took a seat beside her without saying a word at first. She waited, probably thinking I was going to give her some easy out, some way to smooth things over. But I wasn't giving her that. Not this time. Jack, she started, her voice soft, like we were just having a normal conversation. What's going on? Why are you acting like this? I looked at her, not letting myself soften. Cut the crap, Sarah. We both know what's going on. Her smile faded, but she still tried to act casual. What are you talking about? You really think I didn't figure it out? I asked, staring her down. You think I don't know what's been happening between you and Aaron? Don't even try to deny it. I saw everything. Her face turned pale, but instead of panic, she just looked tired, almost bored, like she was ready to move on to the next chapter, and I was just in the way. You really need to stop this, Jack, she said, her voice suddenly colder. This isn't helping anyone. What do you want me to say? Yes, it happened. Yes, I made mistakes. But you weren't perfect either. You were always so distant, so wrapped up in your work, and I needed someone there. Someone who paid attention. I shook my head, feeling the anger rise again. So, what? You think this gives you an excuse? To cheat on me? To sleep with my brother, Sarah? You think I deserve that just because I was distant? I'm not perfect, but I didn't deserve this. She sighed, leaning back, her arms crossed defensively. I'm not saying you deserve it, Jack, but you have to understand. I was lonely. I didn't know how else to handle it. And you didn't think about how I'd feel? I asked, my voice tight. How this would feel. You didn't think about how much this would wreck me, how much it would destroy everything we had. She looked away, finally showing some remorse. But it was too little, too late. I'm sorry, she said, but there was no real emotion behind it. Just a half-hearted apology, like she was just waiting for me to leave her alone. I could feel the last piece of me breaking in that moment, the part that still wanted to believe in her, the part that still thought we could fix things. But it was gone. There was nothing left to save. I stood up without another word. I'm done, Sarah. You and Aaron can have each other. I don't want any part of this anymore. For a moment, she didn't say anything, and that was all the answer I needed. She wasn't going to fight for me. She wasn't going to fight for us. I turned and walked away, every step feeling like a weight being lifted off my shoulders. It was over, and though I felt like I was leaving behind a piece of myself, I knew I was walking towards something better, something real. As I walked away from Sarah, each step felt like I was shedding a layer of the man I used to be. The man who thought love was enough. The man who thought his brother would never betray him. But with every footfall, I felt a strange kind of freedom, like I was stepping into the unknown, but it was better than staying in the lie I'd been living. I didn't even know where I was going. I just needed space, time to think, time to breathe without the weight of Sarah's betrayal crushing me. I walked for what felt like hours, until I ended up in a quiet little bar on the corner of a street I didn't recognize. I didn't care. It was dark, it was quiet, and it was away from everything. I took a seat at the bar and ordered a whiskey, trying to drown out the voice in my head that wouldn't stop replaying the last few days. The pain, the anger, the disbelief. And then, as if fate had a twisted sense of humor, I heard a familiar voice behind me. Jack? I turned slowly, and my heart stopped. It was Aaron. I froze, not knowing what to do or say. I was already done with him, but here he was, standing there like he had a right to be in my life. He took a seat beside me, his face flushed like he'd been drinking for hours. I've been trying to figure out what the hell to do next. With everything that's happened, I stared at him for a moment, speechless. He didn't deserve my time, but I was too stunned to leave. What do you want, Aaron? He looked down at his hands, fiddling with his drink, avoiding my gaze. I don't know, man. I fucked up. I've been thinking about everything, about how much I ruined everything, about how much I hurt you. He paused, his voice quiet. But what if it wasn't just the affair that messed things up? I raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? I mean, what if there's more to it than just me and Sarah? He asked, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity one hadn't seen before. What if you were the one who pushed her away? I felt a chill run through me. What the hell are you talking about? Aaron leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper. I've been thinking about it, Jack. And I know it sounds crazy, but I think she was never really in love with you. Not like I was. And maybe, just maybe, she was looking for something else. Something you couldn't give her. I shook my head, not wanting to hear it. Don't put this on me, Aaron. Don't you dare. But he wasn't done. I'm not saying it's your fault, but I think you both were just drifting. And I was there. I was there for her when she needed someone. Maybe that's the real reason this all happened. Not because she didn't love you, but because she needed more. I think we both did. I wanted to hit him. I wanted to scream at him, tell him to get the hell out of my life. But something in his words hit harder than I expected. Something deeper. Why the hell are you even telling me this now? I asked, my voice shaking with anger and confusion. What are you trying to do? Make me feel sorry for you? He shook his head, his eyes full of guilt. No, I just need you to understand, Jack. I didn't do it because I wanted to hurt you. I did it because I thought I could make her happy. And now Now I realize I was wrong. We both were. For the first time, I saw something in Aaron's face that I didn't expect. Regret, real regret. Not just for what he'd done to me, but for what he'd done to Sarah too. He'd been so focused on getting her, on being the one she turned to, that he hadn't seen how much it was destroying all of us. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do. But in that moment, I realized something that shook me to my core. I wasn't the only one who had been betrayed. In the end, we were all victims of our own choices, of our own weaknesses. I stood up, grabbing my jacket and walking toward the door, but before I left, I looked back at Aaron one last time. "You're right about one thing," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "We all messed up, but I'm done playing this game." I walked out into the night, the weight of everything still heavy on my chest. But for the first time, I felt like I could breathe again.